fans, Black Friday has come early this year, and we're ripping up our prices for a limited time only. Get the heaviest hitting deal of the year. Save up to 33% on all plans and stack up your fight calendar with over 150 fights a year. Live on DAZN.
What a fight we have here in our main event.
And then enjoy a knockout November schedule. Subscribe before November 29th. Sign up at DAZN.com/boxing.
So we got the Fury Usyk card, which is announced in its entirety, and I can't, well, you know, strange things have happened, but I can't envision if a fight is added to it, it'll be necessarily anything major. Now that could change, you never know. Kabayel versus Bakoli potentially could be added, you just don't know. But we're really looking to next year's Riyadh season, and I think if the Riyadh show is this year anything to go by, next year will definitely have, it'll have to go a long way to top some of the shows we've seen this season. And you know, last year we only got Fury Usyk. I say we didn't get Fury Usyk, we got Fury Ngannou, and that was the start of these really big shows. And you know, the very first one they did, which is around about a year ago, I think it was a year ago yesterday, that was, as much as we didn't like the fight, the main event, Fury Ngannou, that card in of itself was something that was just so out of the ordinary for the modern boxing fan. Now I know good cards have existed back in the 90s. Don King is a very, very good example. He put on great cards back in the 1990s. But in the kind of modern, I don't like his number, but in the modern era, you know, we've kind of almost become accustomed to, at that point, paying for a main event and having an undercard that was just, you know, meh. We've become used to that. Now I know some of the fights on the undercard were not necessarily massively competitive. You know, Joseph Parker, I think, fought some guy. I can't remember who it was. Adelia Wadley was good. I think Frank Sanchez fought Junior Fa, or that might have been a different one. It might have been that, or it might have been a different one. But you get, actually that might have been Day of Reckoning. But you get what I mean. And the Day of Reckoning came. You know, this year we've had plenty of good cards. You know, I don't think anyone can say that there's been a bad Saudi card. You know, some have been stronger than the others. That's going to happen. That's going to happen regardless. So next year has a lot to, it's got a lot of work to do to top this year. But apparently they're starting off in a good way. February will be the first one, apparently. February 22nd. And it's going to be, by all accounts, a big card. Now, you would imagine Daniel Dubois is going to headline that. They're obviously talking as well about a Matchroom Queensbury show again. So, you know, that was just, the first one was good, so why not do it again? But they're talking about Daniel Dubois headlining. Now, a lot of people are wondering who is he going to headline against, because obviously Anthony Joshua was the name. That's who they were talking about, and I got to do a separate video on Anthony Joshua, because if it's not Dubois next, who is? I know Eddie Hearn was talking about waiting for Fury and Usyk, but you know, I mean, I'll do that in a separate video. I'll talk about that at a bit more length in a separate one. But with Daniel Dubois, the question then comes, well, who does he fight? Because you got to remember, he's now mandatory. Yes, a final eliminator has been called by the IBF. It certainly has. They're very strict with mandatories. Even sometimes they're unnecessarily strict. I know people could say, how could they be unnecessarily strict? Well, when your mandatory is injured and your champion wants to have a fight and they say, well, if you fight anyone you're going to get stripped, it's like, well, the mandatory can't physically fight. I'm talking about Jay Apataya and Myris Bradis. That just makes no sense. Or having an interim belt and then not using an interim belt when you know what I mean. The IBF do certain, they're strict, which is good, but sometimes it's like, where's the limit? And what I mean by that is you don't want to be lax or anything like that, but when you look, I think you're like, that's a bit So they have no mandatory. They've got one order as a final eliminator. They've got that order, but Dubois is free to fight whoever he chooses. So February 22nd, we're hearing that that's going to be his next outing as heavyweight champion. Joseph Parker's trainer Andy Lee has declared that they would be ready to challenge Daniel Dubois for the IBF Heavyweight Championship of the World on February 22nd if the Anthony Joshua rematch does not happen next. Would it be? It wouldn't be a unification, obviously, but Joseph Parker is, at last time I checked, was the WBO interim champion. Now we know interim is it's not the same as being the full heavyweight champion. It's not the same as being the full WBO champion, which Alexander Usyk obviously is. But it does mean that, let's say Alexander Usyk fought Tyson Fury, and say he beat Tyson Fury again and decided, you know what, As Sugar Ray Robinson once said, had my day in the sun. That's it. I'm done. And he sailed off into the distance. Essentially what he'd do then is he would free up a lot of belts. The belts would be stagnant, the WBC would go somewhere, the WBA, and obviously the WBO. That would then mean that Joseph Parker, if the Dubois fight hasn't happened by then, which it wouldn't if Alexander Usyk retired not long after, it would mean he would be elevated to full champion, which would then actually turn this fight from a interim versus full to a unification. So you never know, that could be a selling point. I mean, if ever a man is overdue a title shot, it's got to be Joseph Parker at this point. And you got to figure he's had back-to-back good wins, in spite of the fact they haven't stole the show, let's put it like that. They have been good wins. Deontay Wilder and, of course, Zhilei Zhang, who obviously went on to beat Deontay Wilder. And Zhilei Zhang he's looking for an opponent. We don't know if it's going to be Bacoli. It could be Dubois. You never know. But I think Joe Parker Dubois would make a lot of sense for a variety of reasons. And namely, as I said, Joseph Parker is interim champ of the BBO. So the very worst, it would be Dubois giving a voluntary crack to Joseph Parker, where he has a minor tricket to gain. But you got to factor this in. Should someone like it's Fury Usyk, should Alexander Usyk win and he decides to call it a day, well, obviously that would be before Dubois fights Joseph Parker, you would imagine. But if he does, then it becomes actually Dubois versus Parker for the full title. And likewise, if Tyson Fury wins, Fury has spoken about if he wins, well, he spoke about that before it was undisputed, but I would imagine it's still the same case now. If he becomes unified champion, which it will be now, vacating all those titles except the WBC, which would then mean that Joseph Parker will be elevated to full champion anyway. So at the very worst, this could be a voluntary with an interim belt potentially at stake as well for the winner. At best, it could be a unification, which is a much, and it's a good fight in of itself. So I was going to say it's an easier sell. It's not a hard sell, really, Joseph Parker versus Daniel Dubois. It's not really that hard of a sell for me. I think it's an interesting fight. In terms of how I think the fight would go, that's an altogether interesting one. So Parker is, I've spoken about Parker before. He's a frustrating heavyweight at times. Because with Joe Parker, I see a lot of talent there. Natural talent, athleticism, a little bit of punching power as well. And the worst thing is, if you see Joseph Parker against a fringe contender, or someone who's not that very good, not very durable, and doesn't really pose any real danger, you'll be impressed with what you'll see from Joseph Parker. You really will. You'll see combination punching, you'll see him sitting into shots, you'll see, good hand speed. It's a really good thing to watch. That's why when he was on the come up before he was the BBO champion, I thought Joseph Parker looked very good. Ever since he fought Carlos Takam back in 2016, whenever he's made that move to that level, yes, he's won fights, and yes, he still looked good in some of those fights, but he's never, at least in my opinion, he's never really truly put it all together. Yes, against Zhilei Zhang had he was done after about 3 rounds in terms of stamina wise, and and Deontay Wilder didn't do anything. He's never really been able to fully put it properly together against a top level opponent, and I don't think he'll be able to do it against Daniel Dubois. And quite frankly, I think that Dubois' pressure, his strength, his punching power, I think that would be just too much for Joseph Parker. In my opinion, I think it would be too much for Joseph Parker. And I think it would go probably earlier than the Joe Joyce fight, but I think it might go a similar way. I'd be certainly making Daniel Dubois a favourite. And I know Joseph Parker's not that old in terms of heavyweights, but I would see this as a bit of a old guard meets young guard, the new generation, which Dubois is certainly in. And I think it's really going to be next year when we really see that era start of the new generation heavyweights. And sadly, so I say sadly because this has been an era where I've started my channel, I've spent the last decade watching. I think we'll really see it come to a close next. I think 2025 be the end of it. 2016 be the, or 2026 be the end of it. And that's going to be a sad sight. Joseph Parker kind of fits into both because he's young enough to go into this era, this new era, but you would still view him very much so as the old guard. That's that. So Andy Lee suggesting that Joseph Parker will be ready by February 22nd. Well, I should hope so. I mean, he's not fought in since March and no injuries, I would imagine. So yeah, you would hope he is ready. Parker versus Dubois. WBO interim champion, maybe full, you never know, by the time the fight comes around, against IBF champion Daniel Dubois, coming off a career best performance, because it does seem likely that it won't be Anthony Joshua he's fighting next. It will be a voluntary, and it will be an opponent of his choosing in the top 10, of course, top 15. So let me know your thoughts. Do you think Parker is the most likely? Certainly he's the most deserving, but in boxing it's not always the most deserving who gets that crack. You know, I mean, like Joseph Parker, I mean, he's been idle for the last 8 months now, thereabouts, nearly 8 months. March was when he fought last. And, you know, the likes of Joshua have had runs out. Zhang was straight back out. Zhang was the guy who he beat, and he was back out on the Matchroom Queensbury show. So it's not always, you know, the most deserving don't always get it in boxing, unfortunately. But Parker, long overdue a title shot. If he gets it against Dubois, I think it's an easy fight to sell. And Dubois may very well be headlining, you never know. So let me know your thoughts on that fight in the comments below. Joseph Parker and Andy Lee putting his name well and truly in the hat for February 22nd. Let me know your thoughts. I'll leave it there. Smash the like button if you could. Hit subscribe, of course, as always, if you haven't already. Until next time, lads, I'll leave it there. Peace.